Yeah, that's better.
That's better, okay. So you can hear me now. Can you?
So it's okay to record this? I've already turned it on.
Yeah. Can you hear me correctly?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
It's a little low, but I can hear you.
All right.
So,
Yeah, we talked yesterday, and I had a few questions, and so yesterday you said
yes.
we will continue with noble right view, and the time before we talked, you said we continue with the third noble truth. But in my experience with you, it's all pretty intertwined, so I think it does not really matter where you go on.
Well, yesterday we started with talking about the jhanas
Right.
and how valuable the first jhana is, and then we started into right view. And so today I would like to continue on with that, but I need to get my book because this is the place where I really like to read into the book to show you
All right.
exactly what the Buddha is talking about.
All right.
So, this sutta, Maha Chakrasaka Sutta, which means the Great 40, and that actually the reason for the title only comes at the end of the sutta. When Ananda asks the Buddha what should be the name of the sutta, and he says it's the Great 40. Well, now that's really interesting. Just off the bat, if we're going to be talking about the Eight Noble Truths, 8 doesn't fit into the number 40 at all. So something's really weird going on there. The answer is that the Eightfold Noble Path actually ends in 10 because 2 are added. And the 2 that are added are the exact same 2 that are added at the end of the Anapanasati Sutta. And that is knowledge and deliverance. Okay, so knowledge and deliverance become the actual end of the path when the deliverance occurs. In that, we look at the Eightfold Noble Path as kind of a process with its prerequisites. That in fact the Buddha talks about, bhikkhus, I shall teach you right noble concentration with its supports and requisites. Listen and attend carefully to what I shall say. And then they say, yes, we'll listen. What, bhikkhus, is right noble concentration with its supports and requisites? That is right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, and right mindfulness. Then he says, and this is the key sentence, unification of mind equipped with these 7 factors is called right noble concentration with its supports and requisites. So, what we mean by that is that many people think of the word concentration in Buddhism, or actually they bring their own understandings of the word concentration to Buddhism, and then when they hear the words in concentration about Buddhism, they begin to think about concentrating the mind in the sense of focusing it down, and that then they'd use the word concentration as if it were jhana. So we have to understand that there's 2 different worlds of concentration. One of them is to stay too tightly focused, and the other one is to stay focused. An example of that would be that you're a scout on the top of the hill and you see an army going through the valley, and that you need to see many, many things. You need to be able to count troops and get all kinds of information. If you're looking through binoculars, You may be able to find individuals that you're looking for, like the leader of the pack, the commanders, etc., like that. But you cannot see the whole thing, that in fact you're limiting yourself with binoculars. So in that regard, even though binoculars have a kind of concentration so that you can see things specifically, we want the kind of concentration that is able to watch that army go through the valley, as opposed to seeing it, looking at it, identifying a couple of things, and then sitting down and starting a fire and cooking food and forgetting all about it. That's the normal way. No, we want to stay focused on that army. All right, so that's the whole idea of what we mean is the kind of concentration that we're talking about is a consistent concentration rather than a deep concentration.
Right.
Now, that consistency leads us to what we call unification of mind. That's actually a better word to use for Westerners than right noble concentration, because we get confused about what the word concentration means. But now that we understand it in this context of unification of mind, now we begin to understand why this kind of concentration is right and it's noble. Because it's paying attention to all of the things that need to be paid attention to, and we're not paying attention to things that are not worthy of our attention. And we're not too focused to the point that we can see things that are worthy of our attention, but we're missing out on a lot of other stuff that's also worthy of our attention. That's the wrong kind of too deep concentration. Once we understand that, now we can begin to understand, well, what is unification of mind after all? Well, the unification of mind is very much like a ship that is anchored, as opposed to a ship that's being blown from one direction to the other. Okay, it's unified, it's staying put. An example of that would be that the boss comes in and asks the employee, where's the work? I need it done. When are you going to get this done? And instead of being unified with the boss, we become the victim of the boss. And that, in fact, there's a thing called pecking order, to where the big boss fusses at the little boss fusses at the employee fusses at the janitor goes home, fusses at his wife, the wife fusses at the kid, and the kid kicks the dog. Right? This is a pecking order, and that everyone is put into their place by the one above them. And so then they retaliate by putting the next one in their place, down to the kicking of the dog. None of the people there have unification of mind. But if you're in that order and the boss comes to you and says, where's it done? Where's the work? Why isn't it done yet? If you start to see the suffering in the boss, then you do not have to take on his suffering. In fact, you can deal with the boss's suffering by saying, oh, it sounds like they're putting a lot of pressure on you today. How can I help you? By saying that one thing, you're reversing the role, and you're not losing your unification of mind. You're, in fact, maintaining it, because you have now not put yourself into that order of pecking. Another way of looking at unification of mind is a mind that is strong in the truth, so that we see no need to lie. When somebody says, how are you doing? You can say, well, other than the sniffle that I have, I'm fine. If I lie to him, I'll just say I'm fine. We also recognize that this is a social thing, so we can't unload. How are you doing today? And I start saying, well, I've got this problem, I've got that problem, I've got this problem. Now I'm really playing victim. Okay, so there's a middle ground with all of this stuff that allows us to stay unified. If we become afraid, we're not unified. So that this state of unification of mind means that we're truthful, that we're honest, that we're not subject to other people's feelings, that we do not become afraid, that we can maintain ourselves in this present moment. So in fact, the unification of mind can only be had when we're in this present moment. If we are in the past, then we're split between now and the past. If we are planning for the future, then we're split between now and the future. In order to be completely unified, to become a whole unit of individual, you actually become quite unique. Only you can be your own unique person. And that there has been a number of unique people on the planet Earth. Those who don't listen to the drummer. They're not followers. But they're generally not leaders either. They're just solitary individuals that are remarkable in their singularity. Bodhidharma, the Buddha, other philosophers. Kant, for instance, was weird. In fact, a lot of philosophers who really study the nature of the mind, they become quite strange to the ordinary person. Daniel Dennett would be one who was like that. All right, because Daniel Dennett is his own man. Christopher Hitchens was his own man. They did not do what society told them to do. They became unique. The Buddha called this the lion. He also talked about it in the sense of the horn, to be the rhinoceros, to be an individual, to not do what you're told to do because you're part of a hierarchy. You only do what you're told to do after you figure out that it's the right thing to do, that it becomes necessary to look at it. So, what is it that will take us to this place of a unified mind that is unique and that it's not special, it's just unique? It's not ordinary either, because the ordinary mind is a scattered mind. This mind is unique because it's collected together into a unity. And that when we are able to manage that with this Eightfold Noble Path, then that's what we call right noble concentration, a factor of the path. Now, we understand right view as the first item on this path. And it is a noble path. So noble right view is the first thing on the path. Now, when people are introduced to Buddhism, they are always told about the Eightfold Noble Path. But most of the people who are practicing what they call the Eightfold Noble Path is not the Eightfold Noble Path. It's a personal path that they invent based upon what they know about the Noble Path. But until the mind is noble, the path also is not noble. In this regard, there are actually two Eightfold Paths. One of them is noble, and one is not. And we all start on a path that's not noble, and that there comes a turning point when we take that path as a non-noble path, and it becomes noble. Part of that change has to do with understanding personality view. When we begin to understand that I'm not who I was told I was, and I'm not who I think I was, I am not who I think I am, I'm beginning to recognize I'm nothing but a process. That's all that's there. It's just a process going on. Right. And that there's no me there. Once we understand that, then we can begin to understand the layers of things. Now, the Buddha says that right view comes first. Well, how does right view come first? First off, one understands wrong view as wrong view, and right view as right view. So this is our first understanding. This is the first way that we begin to look at right view, is by knowing what is right view in relationship to what's wrong view. Normally, wrong view is to say no to everything. You can think of it as almost an atheistic point of view, but there's two kinds of atheists. One of the kinds of atheists would be a college professor. In fact, he might even be a seminary professor at a religious school. But he's gone deep enough into his religion to find out that it's not what he thought it was, and he can continue to teach. But the important quality of this guy is high moral standard. And we can look at that as opposed to the atheist who would be a drive-by shooter, who is only going for his own greed. So in fact, morality can come to the wise through wisdom. But the Christians say, oh no, only morality can come from God. If there is no God, there's going to be no morality. What they assume is that without God, there is no wisdom.
Right.
All right. But when we recognize, oh no, we can see for ourselves what is the right way to go, then we can start avoiding this wrong path. We do not naturally have to come out of the church and go to be a drive-by shooter. There are other options when we come out of religion. All right, so that drive-by shooter then is the one that I'm talking about who gets everything wrong. All right, he says there is no God, there is no mom, there's no dad, there's no saints, there's no devils, there's nothing. All right, and so this idea then is a nihilistic idea, but the opposite of that is not supramundane right view. The opposite of that is ordinary right view, the right view that ordinary people have. And that the quality of ordinary right view, naturally wrong view, is dangerous, is definitely going to wind up in suffering. But ordinary right view also winds up in suffering. Why? Because the people are trying to do good actions to give good results, and they're ignorantly assuming, so when they do not get the results that they were anticipating, they'll be in suffering. All right, so ordinary right view is saying yes to everything. Yes to mom, yes to dad, yes to the society, yes to heaven, yes to hells, all of that. And so we begin to believe, and so ordinary right view winds up being superstitious. We do not believe, or we believe things that exist when in fact they don't. Wrong view is when we deny the existence of things that actually do exist. Both of them wind up in suffering. So there is another kind of right view, and that new kind of right view is what we call supramundane right view, and that supramundane right view is a view that has no viewpoint. Whenever we are in that pecking order that I mentioned before, we take a position in that pecking order, and then we see it from that position. Actual right view, or supramundane right view, doesn't see just my position in that chain. It sees the entire chain of events going on from one person to the next, everybody fitting in there. All right. So this is what we mean by right view, is we begin to see the overall way of looking at things. Now, by doing that, something kind of strange happens. And that is that if we don't practice supramundane right view, it will fall into ordinary right view. And what is that? Making decisions, making conclusions. In other words, we see how things are and we think that's how things are. But the supramundane right view is a view of inspection. It's a view of investigation. It's based in wisdom. All right, so let me read to you exactly what the Buddha says about that. And what, bhikkhus, is right view that is noble, taintless, supramundane, and a factor of the path? All right, so he says, he's going to actually answer that question. And when I read that, I said, all right, I'm going to get the answer. This is the secret today. He's actually written it in the book. He's got the secret here. What is right view that is noble, supramundane, taintless, and a factor of the path? The answer here, when I read this, I was disappointed at it in the beginning. He says it's wisdom. It is the faculty of wisdom. It is the power of wisdom. It is, in fact, the investigation of state's enlightenment factor. Wow. Wait a minute. Right view is the second aspect of the Sambhojana, the 7 factors of enlightenment. We know that the first factor of enlightenment is unremitting mindfulness, to remember, to come back to this present moment. Now we're beginning to understand that noble right view is that unremitting investigation. to keep watching, to keep looking, to keep learning, to keep investigating, then in fact we don't come to a conclusion. Why? Because if we come to a conclusion, we stop looking, we think we know. But the supramundane factor of the path is one that is an investigation, an overall investigation. That we see ourselves suffering, we see ourselves not suffering. We see others, we see them in suffering, and we see ways to invite them out of suffering. And I say invite because you can't control anyone, but you can invite them, and one of the ways of inviting them out of suffering is by giving them joy.
Right.
This is one of the reasons why in Buddhism we don't go by the same golden rule as the Christians go by, because the Christian golden rule is to give him what I want. We have to, in Buddhism, to investigate a little bit deeper to find out what's the situation and where this guy is and what he needs and wants, so we can address that more directly. So this is real investigation, real wisdom, is noble right view, because it's also not a selfish viewpoint. It's non-selfish. It's the way things really are, and we accept things the way they really are because we keep investigating and we keep getting more evidence, more information to fit into closer to reality. That we don't reject reality because we don't like it or because it's not beneficial to us. All right, so this is the way that we look at one's right view.
Could I understand it like if I take a deep breath and feel joyful and successful in the moment, then it's like that on a me level, and if I do this to other persons, to give them to try to give them some joy, and either they connect to it or not, it's then like on an interpersonal level, right?
Yes. In America, they have a phrase of giving someone the benefit of the doubt. In other words, they may have done something and you don't know whether they did it or not, so you have doubt, and so you give them the benefit of the doubt. In our case, what we're going to do is we're going to give them the benefit of the suffering.
Right. Okay.
We recognize that they're in suffering. Okay? And then, in fact, the doubt is my doubt, not his. I'm not giving him the benefit of the doubt. I can't do that. But if I understand it correctly, then I can give him the benefit of the suffering because I can see it. By looking, I can notice, I can see that people are hurting. And by doing that, I can recognize that, the natural occurrence is that if I am suffering, I want to share that suffering. If I'm angry, I want others to be angry. If I'm sad, I want them to be sad. If I am under pressure from my boss, then I want to put my employees under pressure just like I'm under pressure. Okay, so we begin to share that suffering, and with noble right view, you don't have to do that. You do not have to take on the ordinary right view of going under suffering because he's under suffering, or you're under pressure because he's under pressure. That you can sidestep that. You can become his friend instead. So, now we begin to understand that how the path begins to fit together, because right view comes first. And he says then that one makes the effort to abandon wrong view and enter upon right view. That's one's right effort. Now that sentence is most profound. Let me read it again. One makes an effort to abandon wrong view and enter upon supramundane right view. That is one's right effort. So if people understand this path of, because you know that the path is written so that normally when it's introduced, it introduces effort as the last part. So you start with right mind, right view, and then right attitude, and then you have action, voice, and livelihood, and then at the end of it you have right mindfulness, right effort, and right concentration. Actually, no. Only the right noble concentration should stay at the end, down there when we add wisdom or knowledge and deliverance. And we're going to bring those other two, mindfulness and effort, right up there with right view. And here's where it comes down to, what is one's right effort? One's right effort is to come out of wrong view into supermundane right view. Now, when's the first time do students ever notice that? When the mind wanders away for that very first time, the mind wanders into wrong view. And by saying, wait a minute, my intention was to watch the breath, let me come back and watch the breath and be here now, that's the effort that it takes to come out of wrong view into right view. And that's an effort. Why? Because most people, when they see the mind wandered away, they stay in their wrong view. Oh, this is hard. Oh, this is difficult. Oh, poor me. Maybe I'm not following the instructions. Maybe the teacher's no good. Maybe this Buddhist stuff is no good at all. And you can see how people need to make an effort to change their attitude out of wrong view into right view. And ultimately, this is the only effort that you ever need to put in.
Right, okay.
Even though it's a lot of effort sometimes. This is the only effort. One's right effort is to come out of wrong view into right view. Mindfully, one abandons wrong view and mindfully one enters upon and abides in right view. This is one's right mindfulness. Thus, these three states run and circle around right view. And that is right view, right effort, and right mindfulness. Now, this is a really important point to recognize that my right view and my effort to come out of wrong view and enter upon right view, that is right view. So this is an important point to recognize, that we have to take the mindfulness to keep it going. The more mindful we are, and the sooner we're mindful, then the easier it will be to see that we're in wrong view and to come out of that wrong view and enter into right view. This is why it's good to be able to see feelings early, before they start to compound and build up. It's really hard to come out of the wrong view of anger when you're really, really angry. But when that anger starts, that's the time to catch it. And then you can come out of it a lot easier by knowing it. Okay? So, continuing along a little bit here, therein, bhikkhus, right view comes first. And how does right view come first? One abandons wrong intention as wrong intention, and right intention is right intention. This is one's right view. Sounds a little confusing, so let's put it this way. Intention is the result of right view. And in that regard, we're not fully into right view until we have the right intention. And that right intention is the coming back. So the student recognizes that the mind has wandered away, and if he can say, oh wow, I can see the mind has wandered away, and then coming back to the breath, this is all the intention. But if it's only a right view that does not have that power of the intention to actually come and do something. So this is one's attitude, and I talk about it from the very beginning with students about having the right attitude, when all along I knew that it was such an important quality of the teaching of the Buddha. In fact, these items of right view, right intention, right mindfulness, and right effort, those four are the big ones. Those are the big ones. If you have those, then the other things become almost easy. All we need to do is to mark the points of the path, and they become easy.
Yeah.
If we can have it, go ahead.
Yeah, I think if you have this motivation and you see that this is just part of it, to come back and come back and come back, then all the other things, you just get them after a while because you see them so often. So I mean, all the stuff that you all the hindrances and everything, you just see them so often that you can't really overlook them after a while, I think.
Yes. So, a little bit further, and what bhikkhus is wrong intention? The intention of sensual desire, the intention of ill will, the intention of cruelty, the intention of stepping on others to get our way. The intention is to ignore their suffering because mine's more important than theirs. Okay, this is cruelty, is to take my suffering as more important than other people's suffering. And what bhikkhus is right intention? Right intention, I say, is twofold. There is right attention that is affected by taints, partaking of merit, and ripens on the side of attachment. And there is right intention that is noble, taintless, supramundane, and a factor of the path. So in fact, he's repeating something that I didn't read when we were talking about ordinary right view. So let's go back and review that. And what bhikkhus is right view that is affected by taints, partaking of merit, and ripens on the side of attachment? That which is given, that which is offered. In other words, all of those things that we think are right because it agrees with all the things that we've been told. That there is heaven, there is hell, there is this, there is that, there is superstition, there are enlightened beings, there are good people, etc., like that. So the same thing is true about right intention. It's twofold. There is the ordinary right intention that will eventually wind us up in suffering. An example of that is you give a child a gift, the child likes the gift, and then the next day he's not using the gift. Why are you not using the gift? I'm suffering because you're not using the gift that I gave you, right? So that's ordinary right view. It ripens in attachment. I think I'm doing something right, and I don't get the benefits of it.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's what the problem with ordinary right intention is. But when we have a supramundane right intention that's not affected by taints or affected by terror, and that's the intention of renunciation, the intention of non-ill will, the intention of non-cruelty. This is right intention that is affected by taints and is on the side of attachment. Okay? Well, if the intention is non-ill will, then how can that go to the side of attachment? Well, it does because we don't always get what we want. And what bhikkhus is right intention that is noble, taintless, supramundane, and a factor of the path? It's the thinking. Now this is interesting. The thinking, the thought, the intention, the mental absorption, the mental fixity. In other words, taking control of the mind, directing the mind, having language or verbal talk or formations in one whose mind is noble, whose mind is taintless, who possesses the noble path and is developing the noble path. This is the right intention that is noble and a factor of the path. And one makes right effort to abandon wrong intention and to enter upon right intention, and that is one's right effort. One's right effort. Mindfully one abandons wrong intention. Mindfully one enters upon and abides in right attention. This is one's right mindfulness. Thus, these three states run and circle around right intention, and that is right view, right effort, and right mindfulness. So this is how these four things fit together. We start with mindfulness. Then we add investigation. But we recognize by adding right investigation, that starts to build right noble view. By developing right noble view, we also, with right mindfulness and right intention, develop a right attitude. Okay, right intention or right attitude. Now, here's the thing that's really interesting is that science and math, engineering use the word attitude, but they use it in a slightly different way. In other words, if you've got an airplane that's flying at a particular altitude at the right attitude, then it's going to make progress. If the attitude is down, he's going to lose altitude, and if the attitude is up, he's also going to lose altitude. It's only when the attitude is correct can he maintain the right altitude. Now, let's look at not an airplane, but a building. If that building is at completely perpendicular to the center of gravity below, then that's the right attitude. If that building has an attitude, it's going to lean and eventually is going to fall over in the direction of its attitude. Now we recognize those two things happen in the mind also. So right attitude is actually the key. But we have to have right attitude by having right view. And the way that we gain right view is with right mindfulness and right investigation. In other words, if you're in that airplane, you need to investigate that attitude. If you're building a building, you got to make sure that it's perpendicular, that it's got the right attitude. You don't want it falling over. All right? And so, in a way, we're talking about an engineering project. Your mind becomes an engineering project. And so we have to keep track of what's going on. We have to keep track of that entire building or the attitude of that airplane. Okay, we can't just get focused on one little thing. We got to be able to keep track of what's going on. This is the way that we look at the Eightfold Noble Path. And that we do that so that when we come to speech, action, and livelihood, we can do it correctly because we've got the right attitude. Now, one of the things about Buddhism is that it's evolved over time, and that some of the stuff that's in the next part of what I'm about to read has been lifted out and used as precepts. And so you wind up with the 5 precepts of the Buddha. One is Panatipata Vairamani, the other one is Atinadana Vairamani. All of these things are including the part that I'm about to read to you has been boiled down to just Musawada, right speech. Musawada Vairamani Sakabadam Samatiyami. This stuff comes much later. When they're precepts, that's the same as rules. So the beginning Buddhism, the Buddhist religion, actually breaks the second fetter in order to teach.
Yeah.
But once the students are capable of wisdom, then we say drop the rules and go for what's real. But the Buddha gives examples of that. So let me read this to you. Therein, bhikkhus, right view comes first. And how does right view come first? Wait a minute. And how does right view come first? One understands wrong speech is wrong speech and right speech is right speech. This is one's right view. Okay? And what, bhikkhus, is wrong speech? Well, false speech, malicious speech, harsh speech, and gossip. This is one's wrong speech. What is malicious speech or a malicious gossip? That's when person A and person is talking to person B about person C with the intention of driving a wedge between person B and person C. This is malicious gossip in the way that the Buddha talks about it. Eric Byrne has a name for it as a game. It's called Let's You and Him Pull a Fast One on Joy. Or Let's You and Him Fight. I'm going to stand over here and watch the match. I'm going to set this fight up and then let you and Joy go have a fight. right? This is malicious speech, malicious gossip, right? And so this is one of the things that the Buddha talks about is false speech, is the kind of speech that's intended to separate two other people, causing them suffering or one of them suffering, all right? And so false speech or lying or telling, another one would be harsh speech. Now here's the thing about harsh speech, is that harsh speech does not have a vocabulary. And yet in the English language, we think of harsh speech as a particular vocabulary. Harsh speech is, in fact, having a harsh tone to it, no matter what language it is. In other words, you can use low-class language in a joke, and the joke will be funnier.
Yeah.
Okay? But it's not harsh and was not intended to be harsh. So all four-letter words are not always harsh. And not only that, but even though it's clean language, they can still be harsh. An example of that, if I call the dog and say, "Come here, Poom Pooey, you are such a stupid little dog. I hate you so much. Oh, come on, Poom Pooey." Okay, the dog doesn't understand the words, but he understands the tone of voice. That's what we're meaning by harsh speech, is the tone of voice that we have, not the vocabulary that we use. But the easy way, the child's way, is to think, oh, these are harsh words, therefore let me avoid those words, and then my speech is clean because I don't use those words. Well, I was born and raised in the South, and because of that, everybody had low-class language. And so when I got out of the small towns and the places that I lived and got into, let us say, a higher quality of living, I had to start watching also the words that I was using. So that was the first thing that came about. But it was only later when I understood that the real harshness is not the words you're using, it's the tone of voice that you're using. That's the real harshness. And so this is what we mean by what is wrong speech, is gossip, malicious speech, harsh speech, and false speech. And what, bhikkhus, is right speech? Right speech, I say, is twofold. You would expect it by now. And what, bhikkhus, is right speech? Right speech, I say, is twofold. There is right speech that is affected by taints, partaking of merit, and ripens on the side of attachment, and there is right speech that is noble, taintless, supermundane, and a factor of the path. And what, bhikkhus, is right speech that is affected by taints, partaking of merit, and ripens on the side of attachment? That's just merely the absence of the false speech, the absence of malicious speech, the absence of harsh speech, and the absence of gossip. This is right speech that still can be harsh. It can still have those elements to it because it's just the ordinary speech that becomes acceptable then in normal conversations in the world. And what, bhikkhus, is right speech that is noble, taintless, supermundane, and a factor of the path, is the actual desisting from these four kinds of misconduct, abstaining, refraining from them in one whose mind is noble. So this time it's talking about it's the mind state that you're in. That's what makes the speech noble, is because of the intention or the right view. It's not just merely abstaining from or trying to avoid using false speech. It's doing so with a mind that is noble. One makes an effort to abandon wrong speech and to enter upon right speech. Again, this is one's right effort. So the right effort in all cases is to maintain the Eightfold Noble Path. That's what right effort is all about. Only that. Which means that it's a very simple thing to do, but it has to be done over and over and over and over and over again because the inclination is either to go for wrong speech or for ordinary right speech. One makes an effort to abandon wrong speech and to enter upon right speech. This is one's right effort, mindfully one abandons wrong speech. Mindfully one enters upon and abandons and abides in right speech. This is one's right mindfulness. Thus, these three states run and circle around right speech. And again, that's right view, right effort, and right mindfulness. In fact, here I would actually go so far as to add something to the Buddha, because I know that the Buddha is in there, and that is to add the four. Thus, there are four states that run and circle around right speech. That is, right view, right effort, right mindfulness, and right intention, or right attitude. I would add that in there. All right. So the next one then on action, I'll just read through this because it's exactly the same as what we've been doing already before. And then therein, bhikkhus, right view comes first. And how does right view come first? One understands wrong action as wrong action and right action as right action. This is one's right view. And what, bhikkhus, is wrong action? Well, harming others, killing, harming beings, taking things that are not given to you. This sexual misconduct, pleasures that are not appropriate. This is wrong actions. And what, bhikkhus, is right action? Right action, I say, is twofold. There is the right action that is affected by taints, partaking of merit, ripens on the side of attachment. And there is right action that is noble, taintless, supramundane, and a factor of the path. And what, bhikkhus, is right action that is affected by taints, partaking of merit, and ripens on the side of attachment? Abstaining from living beings, abstaining from taking things that are not given, and abstaining from misconduct and sensual pleasures. That is right action that is affected by taints and ripens on the side of attachment. And what, bhikkhus, is right action that is noble, taintless, supramundane, and a factor of the path? It is desisting from these three kinds of bodily misconduct, abstaining, refraining, abstaining from them in one whose mind is noble, whose mind is taintless, who possesses the noble path and is developing the noble path. This is one's right action that is noble, taintless, supramundane, and a factor of the path. Okay, so both right speech and right action have this quality that ordinary right speech and supramundane right speech seem to be very close together. And in fact, on the outsides, they are. Similarly with right action, that wrong action is to do harm. Right action that is ordinary is to abstain from that. But noble right action is to abstain from wrong action and maintain a mind that is noble, supramundane, taintless, and a factor of the path, because the attitude is built into it. If it's ordinary right action, you may think that my right action is going to get me results, future-oriented, and then I'll wind up in disappointment. It ripens. That's the whole idea of the ripening with attachment. But if we do it nobly, then we only do it for the moment. We maintain right speech and right action because that's the right thing to do right now, not looking for future benefits. That's the way to look at it. Yeah, I see that big smile. So, now we go to the last one, which is right livelihood. And a better way of looking at it is not livelihood, but lifestyle. What kind of lifestyle am I going to have? All right. What is wrong livelihood? Here's a list. Scheming, talking, hinting, belittling, pursuing gain with gain. This is one's wrong livelihood. Well, you know what scheming is. That's plotting, or wanting to say one thing when you mean another. Talking means to talk it up. Hinting, belittling. Another way of talking about it is the bait and switch. We promise one thing and get paid for that, but we deliver something else. All right, this is one's wrong livelihood or one's lifestyle, which basically means instead of doing something that needs to be done in the here now and doing it, we actually are trying to take advantage of others. That's when the livelihood is not right livelihood. Now, in ordinary Buddhism, the Buddhist religion, they actually have a list of things, like dealing in alcohol, dealing in poisons, dealing in weapons, dealing in things that directly are intentionally bought from you in order for that person to go harm another person. This is something that's known. But here we're talking about something else. We're talking about how our own mind works so that we can find a way of making a living, finding a way of having a livelihood where we can do it honestly, where we don't have to scheme, we don't have to lie, we don't have to belittle, we don't have to hold a bait and switch or to promise one thing and then not deliver. So this is one's wrong livelihood. And what bhikkhus is livelihood? This right livelihood. Right livelihood, I say, is twofold. There is livelihood that's affected by taints, partaking of merit, and ripens on the side of attachment. And there is right living that is noble, taintless, supermundane, and a factor of the path. And what bhikkhus is right living that is affected by taints, partaking of merit? Here, bhikkhus, a noble disciple abandons wrong livelihood and gains his living by right livelihood. This is the livelihood that's affected by taints ripening on the side of attachment. In other words, just because we're not doing wrong livelihood, if the mind is not yet noble, then it's still just the ordinary Eightfold Noble Path. That's why I told you in the beginning there are two paths. There is the right view, and then there is noble right view. There is right action, right livelihood, and right speech that is ordinary, and that right speech is refraining from the wrong speech, but it still expects results from that abstaining from wrong speech. That I expect some benefit. To where the real stuff is the benefit happens right now. The mind is noble. That's the value. The mind is noble right now.
Yeah, so we basically, we do that to don't get disappointed and things turn out, and then the next time we think, screw it, I act in a way that's beneficial for me, because last time I tried and it didn't work out right.
Yes. Now we're beginning to see. So there's only about a page and a half left. So let's read the rest of it. Now, notice that after you have right speech, livelihood, and right action, in the traditional way of talking about the Eightfold Noble Path, that's where right mindfulness, right effort, and right noble concentration are listed. But here in this sutta, those things have already been discussed. And so the Eightfold Noble Path actually stops here. And this is where the Great 40 begins. Herein, bhikkhus, right view comes first. And how does right view come first? In one of right view, right intention comes into being. In one of right intention, right speech comes into being. In one of right speech, right action comes into being. In one of right action, right livelihood comes into being. In one of right livelihood, right effort comes into being. In one of right effort, right mindfulness comes into being. And in right mindfulness, right concentration comes into being. So now he's actually adding them back in this sequence, in the sense that he's showing you, oh, wait a minute. If we practice ordinary right action, that helps build the nobility. It helps because we're intending to come out of wrong action into ordinary right action. That still requires mindfulness. It still requires effort. Okay, so this is the place where the Great 40 comes in, is where it's put back into the context that is normally given to students. But the real big issue is that these later things actually need to be there at the beginning of the Noble Path. So that's why there are two paths. Right mindfulness comes into being, but only with right mindfulness and right intention, right investigation. Only then do things start to become noble. All right. This is so complicated, a lot of people never get it. What do you mean there's two paths? All right, so, thus, bhikkhus, the path of the noble disciple in higher training possesses 8 factors, and the Arahat possesses 10 factors. Therein, bhikkhus, noble right view comes first. And how does right view come first? In one of right view, wrong view is abandoned, and many evil, unwholesome states that originate with wrong view as a condition are abolished. And the many wholesome states that originate with right view as a condition become fulfillment by development. This is the whole idea of the skill development, is by practicing over and over again, things come to fulfillment by development. In one of right intention, wrong intention is abandoned, and the many evil, unwholesome states that originate with wrong intention as a condition are abandoned, and the many wholesome states that originate with right intention as a condition come to the fulfillment by stages, by development. In one of right speech, wrong speech is abandoned. In one of right action, wrong action is abandoned. In one of right livelihood, wrong livelihood is abandoned. In one of right effort, wrong effort is abandoned. In one of right effort or mindfulness, wrong mindfulness is abandoned. In one of right concentration, wrong concentration is abandoned. In one of right knowledge, wrong knowledge is abandoned. So as one progresses upon the path, we begin to see more and more clearly this state of unified mind is based in knowledge, and it's based in deliverance. Deliverance from wrong view. Deliverance from wrong intention, wrong speech, wrong action, wrong livelihood. Let's see. In one of right knowledge, wrong knowledge is abandoned. And by doing so, then, in one of right deliverance, wrong deliverance is abandoned. What do we mean by wrong deliverance? That which didn't deliver at all. We thought, by having ordinary right view, that we would be abandon the bondages, but it doesn't. It keeps us clinging. It's only when the mind is noble and pure does deliverance come about. That's why it's called, for the arahats, is deliverance of the mind. And the many evil, unwholesome states that originate with wrong deliverance as a condition are abolished, and the many wholesome states that originate with right deliverance as a condition come to fulfillment by development. Thus, bhikkhus, there are 20 factors on the side of the wholesome and 20 factors on the side of the unwholesome. This Dhamma, discourse on the Great 40, has been set in motion and cannot be stopped by any recluse, Brahmin, or the gods or Mara. In other words, this information is out. It's sort of like if you drop a cup off of a table, that cup is broken. It would not be quite possible to put that cup back the way that it was. Once the Dhamma is let out, there's no gathering it back up and hiding it away. It's out. It's released. The Dhamma is out there. Bhikkhus, if any recluse or Brahmin thinks that this Dhamma discourse on the Great Purity should be censored and rejected, then there are 10 legitimate deductions from his assertions provide grounds for censoring him in the here and now. If that worthy one censors right view, then he would honor and praise those recluses and Brahmins who hold wrong view. And then he goes through them again. So, then he would honor and praise those recluses and Brahmins who have even wrong knowledge and wrong deliverance. If any recluse or Brahmin thinks that the Dhamma discourse of the Great 40 should be censored or rejected, then there are 10 legitimate deductions from his assertion that would provide grounds for censoring him there. Even those teachers, and then he's got a whole list of them here, Asaka, Vasa, Bada, etc., who hold these doctrines of non-causality, the doctrine of non-doing, or the doctrine of nihilism, would not think that this Dhamma discourse of the Great 40 should be censored or rejected. Why is that? For fear of blame, for fear of attack, and confusion. In other words, he's listing a group of teachers who would agree with this, even though they teach differently, because they know if they disagree with this, they will be censored. No one can censor this data without being accused of being wrong. Because this Eightfold Noble Path, or this tenfold path that the Buddha has laid out, he's laid it out in the sense of this is the wrong way to do it, this is the right way to do it, and cannot be refuted. That's quite amazing. And that's why this Sutta is called the Great 40, even though it's talked about as the Eightfold Noble Path. I wonder why they don't even call it the Tenfold Noble Path from the very beginning. But it's been called the Eightfold Noble Path. The Buddha didn't call it the Eightfold Noble Path, did he? Let's see what. Yeah, he did, in the sense of what is right noble concentration with its supports and requisites. And yet the unified mind is not the end of the path.
Yeah.
So by adding these two extras, you could say that this is a tenfold path rather than an eightfold path. But the important points are that with the skill development of mindfulness and investigation, these things are the prerequisites that will change one's right path into a right noble path.
Okay.
That we can abandon wrong action and still suffer. We can abandon wrong speech and still suffer because we expect results from our wrong speech and our wrong actions. But the noble way is to enjoy the moment and not worry about the future. And that's what makes it noble. And by doing so, we can take on that right view that allows us to see the entire sequence of events, like the pecking order that we were mentioning, but we can also see that that pecking order is nothing but also paticca samuppada. That consciousness causes perception, the perception causes internal realization, the realization impacts us causing feelings. Feelings that are ignorant cause grasping, wanting. The wanting causes clinging or attachment. And that begins to be the suffering right there. So it ripens in attachment when it's an ordinary right view. But the supramundane right view does not end in ripening of attachment. So this is the Eightfold Noble Path of the Buddha. Go ahead.
Supramundane right view basically just ends in right now.
Exactly so. And its development of to be here now. And the Buddha called himself Tathagata. which is the Pali word tatata, which means thusness, or be here now. And so you see how all of this stuff is wrapped up around feelings and the moment, this present moment. And our attitudes about this present moment is really all of what it's about. And so this is the Eightfold Noble Path of the Buddha. In a way, this is kind of like a stopping point, or not a stopping point, but a kind of a culmination of, to recognize what the teaching of the Buddha really is all about. It's the integration of the mind into this unity that is free from all of the problems of the world. And that we can bring about it through development. It's possible. It's not impossible.
Yeah.
Yet a lot of people who are wrapped up in the Buddhist religion, they think enlightenment is impossible, because they don't understand this quality of the development and the transition to make the mind unified and noble. And once that happens, then back to the talk that we were having yesterday, you can see, in fact, that this doing this is in fact the same thing as the first jhana. Walking around all the time in first jhana is enlightenment. And that's all that's necessary.
Okay.
That's one's right effort.
Okay, right.
It's actually an easy effort.
Mm.
Jhanas, the fourth jhana especially, hard work. It takes a long, long time. A lot of frustration. But in fact, once we practice correctly, we recognize, oh, we pass in and out of the fourth jhana from time to time all by itself. No big deal.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was the first few months or years that's practicing. I also like sometimes heard about this jhana stuff, and then I tried to get in it, but actually I then recognized that it's just more falling away of stuff that's not needed, and then you just arrive there sometimes, and yeah.
Yes, the question is about this is, how do we gain the power? How do we gain the basis of power? Well, first off, we look at the base, and we see the bases of power are exactly the things that we find here in the Eightfold Noble Path, and that is investigation, concentration, mindfulness, and effort. These are the four bases of power. And what is the power? Success, prosperity, the feeling of completeness, a feeling of satisfaction, of wholesome, of being complete. This is the state of the unification of mind, as a wholeness or a completeness or a satisfaction with the way the mind is. And so walking around satisfied, that's the way to do it. That's enlightenment, is because we've dropped the defilements. What were the defilements? The defilements were actually just things I wanted, and that I felt a victim because I couldn't have them. But now we recognize, well, you don't have them because you didn't develop them. Once you develop them, then then you've got it. Okay, so this is the Eightfold Noble Path. Now you're beginning to see, in fact, how the other three aspects of the Four Noble Truths fit in with this path. That we actually need to experience a little bit of that third Noble Truth to begin to see what it's like, because that gives us the idea of the goal that we're going for. Of being satisfied, being content, being free from hunger, rather than going around trying to satisfy our hungers. That's, by the way, a book by Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. It's called Happiness and Hunger. Have you read that?
Yeah, it's so I googled that once because you mentioned it. It was more like a small text, right? Not a big book.
Not a big book, just a little booklet.
I've read it, yeah. And I think I will read it again. It was pretty good.
It's good, right, to take another look at that, because that's in fact the Eightfold Noble Path, is to come to a state of the unification of mind where there's no hunger. All right, well, let's finish this off now, and we'll figure something out for next time. In fact, Paticca Samuppada. Remember in this talk that the actual description of what is right view was never actually mentioned. It only mentioned that it's wisdom, that it's the investigation. So next time we're going to be doing Sutta number 9, which is named Samaditthi. Okay. What is the Pali for Samaditthi? English is right view. So there is actually a sutta by the name of right view. And what is right view? It's actually a detailed description of the Paticca Samuppada, where one's right view is to see feelings, one's right view is to see perception, one's right view is to see grasping and clinging, etc., like that. And so again, it all fits together, but we'll go into it in great detail next time in regard to it being a further case of right view.
Great, okay.
All right? Sutta number 9, you might want to read it.
I'll do that, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.